was sort of chuckling to myself just the other day because I realized that for Advent today, first day of Advent, and also for Hanukkah next week, the third beginning of Hanukkah, I have two Buddhist sermons coming at you. So you hire a Buddhist, and some of what you get. But there's a lot of conversation about whether Buddhism is a philosophy or a religion. And I believe that the Buddha understand his teaching to be spiritual in nature. So, I come down on the religious side of the conversation. But I can understand why people think of it as a philosophy, right? The Buddha and the centuries of devotees who followed him spent their lives in deep meditative states that allowed them to discern with incredible nuance the motivations of human behavior. I loved that line from Nardos, like, I am learning my humans, right? Which often begins with us, right? I am learning my humans. And they sat in meditation so much to learn their humans. And in doing so, they created these fantastic methodological systems for evaluating their practice. Now, many of you have probably heard of the Four Noble Truths, right? That foundational teaching of the Buddha. Life involves suffering. There is a cause to suffering. There is an end to suffering. And there is a path of spiritual cultivation that brings about this end of suffering. And when you begin to study Buddhism, you learn that that path, the one that brings about the end of suffering, is called the Eightfold Path. But as you dive further, you encounter more of these lists, right? The three marks of existence, the five aggregates, the five hindrances, the six perfections. And this is because the insights are so logically organized that I think this is why a lot of people treat Buddhism like a philosophy. It's just so laid out in all of these lists. But in my opinion and experience, the encounter with insight is not just a grasping of the mind, right? But an experience of profound intimacy with existence. Now, sometimes this is called awakening to your true self, or more commonly, you've probably heard it referred to as enlightenment. But these lists, cognitive as they are, can be very helpful because through meditation, you are learning how to discern the nature of your consciousness. And you're able to see, for example, if you are being seduced by the three poisons, greed, hatred, and ignorance, which hopefully allows you the opportunity to cultivate the three wholesome qualities: wisdom, generosity, and loving kindness. Truly, the Buddhists love their lists, right? There are pages of them. There's like big maps of them. It's a spiritual system that works very well for people who like to follow a method. And I happen to be one of those people, so that's, I think, one of the reasons I have found Buddhism so useful and tender in my life. And if you're this type of person, I would really recommend a meditation practice. Initially, sometimes this can feel like a burden, like who has time for one more thing in their life, right? And I think if it's thought of that way, like adding something, it can feel like a burden. But if you make an effort and you're working with someone as a guide, you're able to take this time to discern your motivations of behavior and also see why we're all kind of fumbling through this life best as we can. And that can be incredibly liberating. Now, I personally study in a Zen tradition, a Mahayana tradition, and in this tradition, there is a list called the six paramitas, or the six perfections that are defining of the path of awakening or enlightenment. And that is the experience of profound intimacy. That's the way I refer to it, because I feel like enlightenment ends up being this sort of box that people talk about. But for me, it's intimacy with life, right? So when you have this intimacy with life, it's marked by these 6 qualities, and they are generosity, ethics, patience, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. Now, the teaching asserts that each of us actually already has these perfect qualities. You already have all of them. But they end up being covered over by hindrances. They end up being covered over by greed, selfishness, delusion, and karmic tendencies. So it's not that we have to learn how to be generous. We're actually already generous. That's our nature, is generous. But because we don't understand ourselves, our true selves, we act in selfish ways. So selfishness is not actually a quality we have. People act selfishly because we don't understand who we really are. By seeing our true self, by encountering our true self, which, according to Buddhist teaching, we will come to understand that we are completely interwoven with all of existence. People who understand that they are completely interwoven with all of existence have no need to act selfishly because they don't feel separate. Selfishness and greed are derivatives of believing that you are separate and therefore you don't have enough and therefore you need to hoard. Right? The desire to hoard comes from feeling separate, like there won't be someone to help. But you are not separate. You're not. Now, it is true that just as a human being, we live with a sense of separation. It's kind of part of the human experience, which is why we do all of these spiritual practices regardless of tradition. It's why we are, as a species, religious, because we're trying to wrestle with this sense of separation. And we've articulated it in all of these different ways, which we call religions. And it's why we do the spiritual practices, to awaken to our true nature, that life is interwoven. So if we all have these qualities, these 6 perfections, generosity, ethics, patience, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom, we cultivate our understanding of them by removing the defilements that cover them up. And we do this through our daily habits and actions. And it starts with recognizing that these defilements didn't come from some other place or are somehow part of your character or your nature, right? You're not a sinner because someone ate an apple. It's not an inheritance. I'm sorry. The reason we're greedy is because we are greedy. That's the unfortunate part of responsibility, right? But also the liberative part. Right? Because now it's not somebody in the past, like, okay, I did this and I can work on it. If we encounter the hindrances in our lives, it's because we've created them, not someone else. And this is why it's up to us to do the work for cultivating a spiritual life. And I say this with all, this morning it happened, right? This morning I'm driving and I was not watching the clock so carefully. And so I was like, oh my God, I got to get there. I'm a little bit late. Or later than I like to be here. And so I'm starting to pull out of my little complex. And there was a car in front of me who was driving very, it was peculiar the way that they were driving. And out of my mouth came, what are they doing? Now, fortunately, right, an accusation. Fortunately, I had just practiced the sermon. And I was able to compost the accusation into a curiosity. And what are they doing as an accusation became, oh, what are they doing? And then I could see, oh, there are these sticks in the road, right? Maybe they're trying to avoid, because it was raining and some stuff fell out of the trees. Maybe they're trying to avoid them. I just drove over them because whatever, right? But, other people do different things differently than me. So they did things differently. And then there came an even more generous thought, which was maybe they're just thinking about somebody else that they really care about, and they're not so focused. Like, it became an opportunity to just be curious in the moment. If we're going to experience the interwovenness with life, which puts us beyond the suffering we experience when we feel selfish, we have to cultivate daily habits through discipline, practice, and a sincere willingness to want to experience life. And we do this not only for our well-being, but because the experience of interwovenness awakens our hearts to unconditional love and compassion, right? I could have driven here this morning pissed off because what is that guy doing? That could have been my experience this morning. Instead, it became, oh, there's something else going on. And my ride was much better. And, probably also had an impact on how I was relating to other cars on the road, which meant their lives were better. Now, so when I say that, this awakening to the unconditional love and compassion, I often shorthand this by saying what we're really trying to do with this life, what we're trying to do at church here anyway, is we are trying to fall in love with the world. How do we fall in love? Not just like awaken, but how do we fall in love? Because the world needs it from us, and we need it from the world. There is a reason why generosity is the first paramita, right, or the first perfection on the list. Generosity comes from a profound sense of belonging. It comes from believing in our interconnected nature. Right? The Sanskrit word is dana, which means voluntarily giving material, time, or wisdom. And cultivating a practice of dana helps us overcome our self-centeredness because we are cultivating an understanding of ourselves as giving people, as generous people. And because Buddhism is so nuanced, the texts are very clear that the perfection of generosity is not actually the action or the act of giving, but the perfection of generosity of the dana paramita is the intention. Right? Our intention is important because there are lots of people who give with the idea of getting in return. Embedded in their giving, embedded in their generosity, is a desire for, reciprocity or even reward. Right? But dana is not concerned with who is worthy and who is not worthy. Will I get something or will I not? It is the cultivation of giving for the perfection of generosity so we can just be generous people, right? Now, some of you are familiar with the fact that I used to host a Buddhist podcast, and I used to interview teachers from different traditions about the nature of teaching. And one of those conversations that there are like 4 or 5 that have just stuck with me. They sort of remain as like these constellations in my life. And one of these conversations was with an American Buddhist nun who trained in Japan, and she talked about how her practice to become a nun was to go, part of her practice was to go begging for food and other support, right, with a begging bowl. And she explained that here in the United States, we interpret this act as a practice that might cultivate humility in the monastic. But Buddhist cultures have a different concept of generosity, and what she was actually doing was giving the people who were putting food and other material in the bowl the opportunity to practice generosity. Right? So from a cultural standpoint, we see putting food in the bowl as charity. From the Buddhist perspective, it is the opportunity to spiritually confront the selfishness that we're living with on a daily basis. People are not helping the nun by putting food in the bowl. The nun is helping the people become more generous, which ultimately means they suffer less because generous people suffer less attachment. The nun goes begging to help the people suffer less. Right? It's not charity. Generosity is the cure for the afflictions of greed, cruelty, and possessiveness. Now, we can see the truth of this in our own culture, right? Even though it's not described this way. How many people have ever mentored somebody? Right? A lot of you. And you can understand how it would be an entirely different relationship if that person had to pay you for your wisdom. Such a different relationship. As a mentor, you might even believe that you received as much or more from the relationship than the person you were mentoring. And it feels counterintuitive in a culture that's telling us to go for self. But what you're experiencing, even though we don't really talk about this way in our mentoring conversation, right, is that you are in the gift, you are experiencing a deep interwovenness with the universe, with that person and the universe, because you are less attached, because you are cultivating generosity, even if you didn't know that's what you were doing. Even if you didn't know that's what you were doing. Now, this is why I think church is so important, right? At its best, church and other worship communities seek to be countercultural by finding ways to help us cultivate and perfect generosity. Now, actually, here's a perfect moment. There was a baby crying. How many of you were bothered? You don't have to raise your, okay, there's a couple. You get a point for honesty. How do you think the parents felt? Uncomfortable. They want to be here, right? They know that people are probably bothered. This is the dynamic that we're in. We're a living community. Hear that, embrace it, find generosity, be like, you're welcome here. Ian's words are transitory and ephemeral and not that meaningful. More meaningful is that we are here for everyone, that everyone is welcome. Ian's words are garbage. Get rid of them, truly. Attachment to words, ugh. Generosity, way more important. Truly. When a church is missional in its focus, it's not thinking about bringing members in or finding leaders. It is thinking only about how can we create opportunities to help others become more generous, more ethical, more patient. How can we cultivate more wisdom? How do we become a wisdom school? The teachings of Buddhism and the teachings of Unitarian Universalism are both leading us to the spiritual awakening that fundamentally we are part of a whole. The whole world is supporting and sustaining us. That we live within a gift. We live within a gift that is so profound we can never repay it. Right? Charles Eisenstein, who I adore, captured this wisdom when he said, we didn't earn, you're going to hear this again from me because I love it so much. We didn't earn any of the things that really keep us alive or make life good. We didn't earn the air. We didn't earn being born. We didn't earn our conception. We didn't earn being able to breathe. We didn't earn having a planet that can provide food. We didn't earn the sun. I don't care how hard you worked at your job. You didn't earn the sun. So I think and he continues, so I think on some level, people have this inborn gratitude because on some level, we know we didn't earn anything. Not anything that really keeps us alive, right? We know that life is a gift. If you know that you've received a gift, then the natural response is gratitude and the desire to give in return. I love that quote. When we awaken to this realization, we are overcome with gratitude. The natural response of a grateful person is generosity. So by this point in the sermon, you've probably realized that the Buddhists have 4 levels of generosity. Right? I love them. God, they are so nuanced. And there are 4 aspects of this first paramita. The 4 levels are: 1, being generous with our material possessions; 2, being generous with our words; 3, being generous with our thoughts; 4, being generous with our time. Right? Now, each of these 4 aspects of generosity has a contrasting hindrance that reinforces our self-centeredness or selfishness. But it does not take a skilled practitioner to realize that the less generous we are with our material possessions, our words, our thoughts, and our time, what we're actually doing is reinforcing our self-centeredness and selfishness. We already know this to be true. In 2013, Daniel Goleman, who many of you know because he wrote this best-selling book called Emotional Intelligence, but he wrote an article in the New York Times called "Rich People Just Care Less," which is a great title because you want to read it. But what he does is he explores how money provides the luxury to focus on ourselves because we don't need to rely on others as much. Rather than creating and cultivating relationships based on an interwoven reality, being wealthy allows people to purchase services they need, which detrimentally impact society. Goleman writes, "People with the most social power pay scant attention to those with little such power," which is not surprising, we might think. But he goes on to add that the prerequisite to empathy is simply paying attention to the person in pain. And the more powerful were less compassionate towards the hardships described by the less powerful. Further, the financial difference ends up creating a behavioral difference. Poor people are better attuned to interpersonal relations with those of the same strata and the more powerful than the rich are because they have to be. They have to be. And finally, Goleman concludes, this has a profound implication on societal behavior and governmental policy. Tuning in to the needs and feelings of another person is a prerequisite to empathy, which in turn can lead to understanding, concern, and if the circumstances are right, compassionate action. The point, really, of his article was to highlight that the lack of compassionate action in our society, and particularly in our political sphere, which have just spiraled in the last 10 years since he wrote this article, where we see every political agreement, it just seems to require a cut in food stamps or health benefits or education. It's because there seems to be very little empathy for those among us who are suffering. And he's not saying being poor is good. That's not what he's saying, right? It's just what he's saying is to survive, poor people need to be more generous with one another, which leads them to being more compassionate and understanding of other people's circumstances. And he's not saying that being wealthy is bad. It's just that it provides an environment that allows people to avoid interdependent living, right? We can just buy our way out of relationships. I don't like this choir, I'm going to buy a new choir. There are churches with paid choirs. And they get, not here, but other places. And if Mark doesn't like how one of those people is singing, he fires them. Not here, right? Here, they work together in a different way. And it's a different choir because of that. I'm just going to leave that giggle by itself. Ironically, right, the derivative comment is that wealthy people actually suffer on a spiritual level because material comfort can isolate and reinforce a sense of separation instead of interwovenness. So it just means being wealthy, it means we have to practice more, honestly. Now, of course, this focuses on the material generosity, and the Buddhists point out that material generosity is the easiest of the forms to cultivate, right? It's the first on the list. You can round up your bill at the supermarket by donating a few cents, and cumulatively, it probably has a big effect. And it probably has an effect on you, in a way. And it's also a way to be like, oh, I give, right? I'm generous. More difficult than giving money, though, is being generous with your words. Oh, Sue. Like saying nice things. Harder than just like paying your way out. Harder than that, generous of thought. Because we all know people who say nice words and, well, we know how it goes, right? And when it really happens, right, when we're not careful, when we're not generous of thought, but we're generous of words, it comes out as passive aggression, right? Our words reveal what our thoughts really are, which are not kind. This was me this morning. What is he doing? Oh, what is he doing? Accusation to curiosity changed my whole morning. Beyond generosity of thought is generosity of time, which is often interpreted as people who pass along wisdom freely, right? We all know people who give thoughts, words, and time in hopes of getting something. And they hide behind words of generosity, but really what they're trying to do is enforce a worldview on others. Generous words inspire and encourage us to believe in others and in ourselves. Generous thoughts are not just thinking well of another, but actively engaging in the cultivation of a generous mind. Generous of time is the willingness to sit with others through difficulty. And the Buddhists have this special quality to it, which they call sharing the Dharma, which is like the teaching, right? We would call it, inviting someone to church, maybe. And many people feel really uncomfortable inviting someone to church. And I think one of the reasons is because it feels like we're trying to get somebody like, oh, I want somebody to come to my church, so my church is bigger and better. But that's not what they're talking about, right? Being generous with time happens to be, oh, you're suffering. I belong to this community, and it has helped me change my life. It's tough. Holy smokes, there are potatoes that bounce together a lot. But in doing so, I am becoming a better person. If you would like to come, I would love for you to come, and I will sit with you. I'll introduce you to some friends. I want you to be happy. That's a different type of invitation. The world is lonely and isolating, and our culture is driving us to hoard and be fearful, and it's unhealthy. But coming to church, where we bump together like potatoes, we are slowly cleaning ourselves in our hope to cultivate willingness, gratitude, generosity, agency, and hope, so that we can transform our lives and our culture. Now, I referenced the choir, and actually, I think one of the reasons the choir is so meaningful as a part of church life, right, is because, yeah, it's fun for them to sing. They get to sing, they get to stand up here, everybody sees you, everybody applaud. Like, that's fun, right? But what they're really doing, and they may not even know they're doing this, what they're really doing is giving you the gift of spiritual music which helps your journey. Now, they may know that, but if they don't, that's what you're doing, by the way, right? You are helping them along their path. And it helps them experience a greater sense of openness in their lives because they are practicing being very generous. They are here every Wednesday night listening to Mark go, nope, nope, here's the punch. And it takes a certain humbleness and willingness to be prodded so that they can give you the gift that you need. That's why yes, they sing and it's lovely, but that's why they do, so that you can grow and be free and be liberated. Truly. And it's an amazing thing because this rarely happens out in the world. Where do you get to come and be a part of a group that is just designed to give you a gift, give others a gift? That doesn't happen in other parts of our world, right? It may seem counterintuitive, but this is also why serving on a committee is good. Now, let's be honest about ourselves right now at MVUC. Committee work right now is hard. COVID really wreaked havoc, right? There's some committees with like one person on them, right? And so they're like struggling to do this work so that something doesn't fall apart. It's hard. And we're going to be working on this next year. There's just too much change going on this year. We're going to work on the volunteer structure next year. But when there's a volunteer culture, which is what a church is designed to do, is help you understand a volunteer and living within a gift, then being part of committees is actually incredibly rewarding because you are part of something, not its own isolated thing. You are part of a whole that is there, that exists because someone is walking in off the street and they are lonely and they are lost. And guess what? They just got caught and held by somebody, which is this church. Seems weird, because committee work can be so hard. But what we're doing is we're creating a space where we can catch people who are lost and lonely and hold them and tell them, it's okay, we got you. When we encounter the paramita of dana, when we realize what generosity really means, we discover that the giver experiences profound happiness, not because they gave out of duty, but because they experience the joy of helping others. There is no other purpose to a church than to provide you the opportunity to experience the joy of helping others, because it's that opportunity that frees you from suffering. So please receive the gifts that are being offered by those in the church. Be the nun with the begging bowl. You are helping these people. Accept the gift. But also seek out the outstretched hands, the outstretched bowls, and allow these people to help you. And together, we will shed our selfishness and awaken to our interdependence. Amen.